What's up, BookTube? It's Monty. I'm back again today. I'm going to be discussing Carry On by Rowell. We'll get into a quick plot synopsis. It's a fantasy adventure novel set in an English boarding school. Obviously, it is a low-key Harry Potter parody situation that was first introduced in Rainbow Rowell's novel Fangirl a long time ago. This book is like 3 years old. You probably have heard about it. Non-spoilery thoughts. I was not the biggest fan of this book. I didn't think that it was well developed. I don't think that the plot... It took 130 pages for the main plot to be introduced, and this book is like a little over 500 pages. It's like 522, I think, somewhere around there. 130 pages before we got to the main plot. So normally I wouldn't care. Like, this was a 500-page contemporary. I wouldn't care that we spent 130 pages just sort of getting to know everybody, getting to understand things. But it's a fantasy adventure-ish novel, and 130 pages of it have nothing to do with the main plot. Like, nothing at all to do. You could argue that they do. I wouldn't. I think that the instigating incident happens on page like 135, and even then, it's like another 15 pages until book 2 when things really start to happen. And even in book 2, it still takes another like 20 pages, so it's almost 200 pages. So 130 is generous. The characters were all right. I like the characters for who they were. At the end of the day, I talked about this in the Dream Thieves review, that this is a fantasy series, but this is written by a contemporary author who sort of, I think after this she dabbled in more fantasy, mystical, magical realism things with Landline. But this, I'm going to set it down because I'm not a fan. Those are my non-spoiler thoughts. The characters are all right. At the end of the day, it reads more like a contemporary novel than it does a fantasy novel. My main issues with it were the world building at the beginning of the book, the first 130 or so pages. That is what that is spent doing, is meant to be building the world. And I think that the magic system here was interesting, and I think that's why I love Grossman. He gave a blurb for it, and he wrote The Magicians, which I've talked about in depth on my channel, all 3 books. I talked about my thoughts on the first season. I've since caught up on seasons 2 and 3. I think they're better. Definitely better than the books were. And I think that's why Lev Grossman called it a triumph, because his magic system was different, and Rainbow Rowell, for her credit, she does come up with something that is different. I don't think that it worked as well as Lev Grossman's did. I think that Lev, because he was actually writing an adult fantasy series, he sat down and there were rules and it made sense, and there were always things that followed the rules, and when something broke the rules, there was an explanation for it. And here, the magic system is based on the idea that words have magic, they have power, and if you're a magician, you can tap into the power of the words to cast a spell through your magic channeling device. Sometimes it's what we would call a wand, sometimes it's just a ring. One character has a belt buckle. Like, it was interesting. But I think that a lot of it was also just throwing out these magical creatures and calling it world building. Like the merewolves and the numpties and the pixie that Penelope was a roommate with, and the vampires, but none of those things were ever explained in depth. We have a character who's a vampire who knows nothing about vampirism and it's explained, and we're not going to go there because his family doesn't do that. Like, we're not doing that. We're not going to acknowledge it, so we don't kill you, even though it makes more sense for them to just kill him. Like, there were aspects of this world where it's like, yeah, it exists, but we're not going to explain it because that's not the point of the book, and we're not going to go there. And in my mind, I'm like, then why are we here? Like, I understand that she wrote Fangirl, and some people really wanted to see more of this Simon Snow that she introduced in that book through the fan fiction snippets or whatever. I'm not one of those people. I'm picking this up because if you watched my May TBR video, my library haul, I picked this up because it's been on like Goodreads lists featuring LGBTQIA+ characters. And I'm going to get into that aspect in the spoiler section because it's treated like a big plot twist, a big plot reveal. And so why it was ever on those lists, I don't understand from that aspect. But also, I don't think that this is good representation for men who are interested in men, especially in the young adult market. I think that the writing of those two characters was actually really poor in the dynamic of their relationship, and I think that it was 100% toxic. I don't understand how anyone could like them together in the context of this book, simply because I think the writing was so poor for that relationship specifically. So the world, like I was saying, I thought was really underdeveloped, even though the magic system was great. In the beginning, I was all for it, but as it kept going on, I was like, these are just really popular phrases, and I understand that those would obviously have them more power because more people are using them, but I was also like, if normal people are creating these magical phrases, then why are you acting like you're superior? Not everyone in the mage realm or whatever was acting superior, but I didn't understand how you would have the logic that just because you could tap into the power of the words, that makes you better than the normal person who created the word and the phrasing in the first place, especially because it was acknowledged that even though it's a assignment at Watford, which is the magical school here, standing in for Hogwarts, I guess, if you want to do a Harry Potter comparison, which I don't because we got a full story with Harry Potter, and this was very much limited in scope, and we referenced things that had happened, but never in a way that ever was explained or ever gave you depth to the character. It was just like, yeah, that happened, and we're gonna keep talking about that one time with the Chimera. And there was a lot of things in this book that were repetitive. Like, they kept bringing up the Chimera incident, or the time where Baz pushed Simon down the stairs, or these other episodes, and I was like, you keep bringing them up. I know they happened. I understand why they hate each other. You never are going... Rainbow Rowell spent a lot of this book explaining the feud between these two characters, and spent no time trying to get rid of it. It just happened. And so that was annoying, especially since I had to read about their feud forever and the anathema forever, and every time the anathema was mentioned, we had to get into an explanation of the anathema as though we couldn't know what it was because you haven't mentioned it 12 times before. So I was not here for it. I just wasn't. I wasn't here for this book. I mean, those are my non-spoilery thoughts. If you haven't read the book, it was nice seeing you. Goodbye. I might spoil things. And the most important thing I want to spoil is this relationship between Simon Snow and Baz. For the first 130 pages, Baz isn't here. Actually, it's more like 150 pages. Baz isn't here. Then he makes his grand entrance, and we're getting his perspective now. And at some point, Baz says he didn't know, starting around his 5th year, he didn't know if he wanted to kiss Simon or if he wanted to kill Simon. And he didn't know that if he did kiss Simon, if he wanted Simon to kill him or kiss him back. But both options would make him happy. That was my first red flag. And then we get, I want to say 200 pages after that point. Because they don't really kiss until around the 350, 400 page mark. After Baz is about to kill himself. Like, he's trying to kill himself. And Simon's like, nah, we're not doing that. You're flammable. You're not gonna do that. And so he kisses Baz. And then they spend like the next 30 pages just making out and talking about how they're making out and how it's awkward for them that they're making out. But there's so much description of them making out that I was just like, we get it. You're making out. I understand. And then like another 100 pages goes by. They don't really interact in any kind of romantic way. And then the epilogue happens, and they're like a couple. To be fair, there were a couple before then too, but it never made any sense because before they kissed and he was trying to kill himself, they were sworn mortal enemies, and we never really got a resolution to that storyline. It was just like, Baz is trying to kill himself. Let me kiss him to like snap him out of it. And I understand that if this was like a fan fiction that I was reading online somewhere, I might not have an issue with it. Like, fine. But it's not. Like, this is a book. People paid money to get this. My library paid money to own this book so that I could read it. It wasn't a free thing. It was a paid thing. And there was no development in that relationship at all. They're introduced as mortal enemies. Even when you're reading about Baz's, when he comes into the story and you're getting his perspective on everything, it is still very much, I want to kill Simon Snow. At no point does Baz ever really change his mind. He's like, yeah, I would bang him, but I still also want to kill him. Like, I still low-key want him dead. And that really bothered me, because I feel like if you're going to do that, then you have to have a resolution there where at some point you course correct that relationship and you fix it. But that never happened. Never happened. The magic system, as it went on, I didn't care anymore. Like I was saying earlier, you have normal people creating these super powerful spells that, I mean, obviously how the magician says it and the nuance and things was addressed. But again, I felt the world building lacked. And I think that the only reason I was reading it was for this epic gay romance that everyone was putting on these lists. Like, go read this. People on BookTube loved this 3 years ago, 2 years ago. It still has a relatively high rating on Goodreads. I wanted to like this book. I thought if there was ever a book that was going to get me into Rainbow Rowell, if there was only one book by Rainbow Rowell I would like, it would be this one. And I'm severely let down. I might have had too high of expectations, but even when I was reading it and I was, you know, fine with the fact that this was going to be a contemporary person writing a fantasy that wasn't really invested in the fantasy aspects, the characters were still great. Like, I was definitely invested in the characters, but as it progressed, I just couldn't give it a higher rating because everything around it just stopped making sense. It was repetitive, it didn't make sense, and I didn't care anymore, so I gave it 1 star. I at first gave it 2, but I used the Goodreads star system, and a 1 star is I didn't like it. And I didn't like it. I don't think this book is okay, but I also don't think it's terrible. It's not, I think it's just like my 1 star review for Red Rising by Pierce Brown, where I don't think it's a terrible book. It's just a book that wasn't for me. The things that I like in my fantasy, like I like in my sci-fi, the world building just wasn't here for this, and it wasn't there for Red Rising. And so if those are things that aren't as important to you and you are more a character focused person, this book might serve you better, because the plot does sort of fall apart at the end. The big twist about who the humdrum was, I sort of guessed from the beginning. I didn't really understand the mage's character at all at any point in this novel. I don't think the ending made it any more clear. I think it actually muddied the waters even more. So at the end of the day, it's not for me. It might be for you, though. It's not a terrible book. It just didn't hit the things that I need my fantasy books to hit. And the characters, as great as they were, weren't enough to bring me back up. I think I would revisit the world if Rainbow Rowell ever chose to go back and she did release a sequel at some point 30 years from now. I would see where these characters are, because I do care about them. If there was ever a novella, I would probably check it out. But as it stands, this book was 1 star. I didn't really appreciate it. But if you've read it, let me know what you thought down in the comment section below, and I'll see you again in my next video whenever that happens to be. But until then, bye.